It was supposed to be the start of their golden years, a relaxing retirement seminar to plan their future together. But for one wife, it became the moment everything she thought she knew about her husband unraveled. A cryptic envelope, secret phone calls, and a name she'd never heard before were just the beginning. By the end of the weekend, she would uncover a dark double life, complete with lies, betrayal, and a connection to a shocking crime. What was her husband hiding, and how far did his secrets go? Stay tuned for this jaw-dropping true crime story, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss gripping stories like this one. The sun glimmered on the lake outside the resort's large bay windows, casting warm streaks of light across the polished floors of the seminar hall. Sarah adjusted her cardigan and smiled at the scene before her. Rows of couples all chatting excitedly, clutching glossy brochures filled with promises of a secure and happy retirement. She and Jack had finally made it here after years of planning, saving, and dreaming about their golden years together. For Sarah, this seminar was the culmination of a lifetime of work and partnership. Jack sat beside her, flipping through the event schedule. His silver-framed glasses caught the sunlight as he leaned closer. "What's next?" he asked, his voice calm and familiar. Sarah glanced at the itinerary. "Session on financial pitfalls in retirement. Sounds useful," she replied, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. She loved that they did these things together, planned, prepared, looked out for each other. Jack had always been the steady rock in their marriage, reliable and charming. But today, his attention seemed scattered, his focus pulled elsewhere. During the seminar, an energetic speaker took the stage, diving into topics like hidden financial traps and how to safeguard investments. Sarah scribbled notes diligently while Jack occasionally nodded, his arms crossed and his eyes wandering. At one point, his phone buzzed softly in his lap. He tilted the screen just enough to shield it from Sarah's view, typing quickly before slipping it back into his pocket. She noticed the movement but said nothing. Jack had always been discreet about his work emails, even after retiring. It didn't seem worth mentioning. Later that afternoon, as the attendees dispersed for a coffee break, Sarah caught sight of a woman waving to Jack across the room. The woman's dark hair framed her face, and her tailored suit was sharp and professional. She moved confidently toward Jack, who stood abruptly. "Be right back," he muttered, leaving Sarah with a brief pat on the shoulder. The exchange was quick. Sarah watched as Jack and the woman stepped aside, speaking in hushed tones. The woman handed him an envelope, thin and white, like something from a bank or a legal office. Jack took it with a nod and folded it neatly into his jacket pocket. Sarah's chest tightened. Who was she? A financial advisor? Someone from Jack's past? Questions buzzed in her mind, but she forced herself to smile when Jack returned. "Everything okay?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, fine. Just someone I used to work with," he replied, slipping back into his seat as though nothing had happened. His tone was easy, his posture relaxed, but Sarah's unease lingered. Over the years, she had become adept at reading Jack's moods, his tells. The slight pause in his response and the way he avoided meeting her eyes hinted at something else. Still, she pushed the thought aside. There was no sense in creating a problem where none existed. As the day's sessions wrapped up, Sarah and Jack returned to their room. The evening air was crisp, and the lake reflected the first glimmers of moonlight. While Jack showered, Sarah unpacked their bags, neatly arranging their clothes into drawers. When she picked up Jack's jacket to hang it, her hand brushed against something firm in the pocket. It was the envelope. She hesitated, her pulse quickening. Her first instinct was to leave it alone. Jack would tell her if it was important, but curiosity burned in her chest. Slowly she unfolded the flap and slid out its contents. Inside was a single piece of paper with a string of numbers, a combination perhaps, written in precise, slanted handwriting. Beneath the numbers was a name she didn't recognize: Amanda Rivers. Her breath caught. Who was Amanda? And why would Jack be carrying this? She slipped the paper back into the envelope and returned it to his jacket, just as she heard the water shut off in the bathroom. When Jack emerged, towel drying his hair, Sarah smiled as if nothing had happened, but her mind raced. That night, as Jack drifted off to sleep beside her, Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The envelope, the woman, the scribbled note, none of it felt right. For the first time in their marriage, she felt a tiny crack form in the foundation of trust they had built. It was a small thing, she told herself. Maybe nothing. But deep down, she knew this feeling wouldn't be so easily shaken. The morning air was sharp and fresh as Sarah stepped out onto the balcony of their room, the lake stretching endlessly before her like a sheet of glass. She sipped her coffee, watching early risers stroll the resort paths below. Jack was still inside, checking something on his phone. His laughter carried through the open balcony door, a short, low chuckle followed by a murmured reply. Sarah froze. He was on the phone. She couldn't make out the words, but his tone was soft, intimate in a way she hadn't heard before. A knot tightened in her chest, and she turned back to the view, trying to steady her breathing. Jack had never given her a reason to doubt him, but the events of the previous day replayed in her mind like a loop she couldn't escape. When he finally joined her, his phone tucked away, he acted as if nothing was amiss. "Ready for breakfast?" he asked, leaning casually on the balcony railing. Sarah forced a smile, her questions bubbling just beneath the surface. She decided to test the waters. "Who were you talking to just now?" she asked, keeping her tone light. Jack's response was quick. "Oh, just an old colleague. He wanted some advice about a consulting project." He turned back toward the door before she could press further. "We'd better head down before the line starts." As they walked to the dining hall, Sarah noticed Jack's phone buzz again in his pocket. He glanced at it and silenced it without stopping. The gesture was small, but her unease grew. At breakfast, the tension between them seemed to dissolve briefly as they chatted about the day's upcoming sessions. Jack's charm was effortless, his laughter contagious, and for a moment, Sarah almost convinced herself that she was overthinking everything. But that fragile reassurance crumbled when they entered the seminar hall. The session that morning focused on managing finances in retirement, a topic Sarah had always taken seriously. The speaker, a former forensic accountant, shared cautionary tales about hidden debts, risky investments, and fraudulent schemes that had wiped out unsuspecting retirees. Sarah found herself enthralled, jotting down notes furiously. Jack, however, seemed distracted. He leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed, his attention drifting to his phone resting face down on the table. During the Q&A portion, Sarah raised her hand, asking a question about identifying discrepancies in financial records. Her voice was steady, her question innocuous, but she couldn't help glancing at Jack as she spoke. He met her gaze briefly, then looked away, his jaw tightening. When the session ended, Jack excused himself abruptly, saying he needed to take a call. Sarah watched him disappear into the corridor, her mind churning. Something wasn't right, and the quiet voice in her head telling her to ignore it was losing its strength. On impulse, Sarah decided to step out of her comfort zone. She wandered to the resort's library, a cozy room lined with shelves of dusty books and soft leather chairs. There, she spotted a woman she'd noticed earlier in the seminar, a lively attendee who had spoken during one of the discussions with sharp wit and confidence. Sarah approached her cautiously. "Hi," Sarah began, her voice tentative. "I'm Sarah. I think we sat near each other yesterday during the workshop." The woman turned, her face lighting up with a friendly smile. "Oh, yes, I'm Maggie. Nice to meet you." Her handshake was firm, her energy warm and inviting. They chatted easily, discussing the seminar topics and trading thoughts on the speakers. As their conversation deepened, Maggie shared a personal story about her late husband, who had gambled away their savings in secret. "It's shocking how little you can truly know about someone, even after years together," Maggie said, her voice tinged with a mix of pain and acceptance. The words struck Sarah like a physical blow. She tried to respond casually, but the truth was already unraveling in her mind. Was it possible she didn't know Jack as well as she thought? She glanced at the clock and realized Jack had been gone far longer than the duration of a simple phone call. "Is everything okay?" Maggie asked, her perceptive gaze studying Sarah's face. "Oh, yes," Sarah replied quickly, forcing a smile. "I'm just thinking about the next session." But even as she spoke, her thoughts were elsewhere. She was done brushing aside her doubts. Jack's actions didn't add up, and she wasn't going to ignore the mounting evidence any longer. The rest of the day passed in a haze, with Sarah unable to shake her growing unease. Jack returned from his call, smiling and calm, but the edges of his charm felt sharper now, like a blade hidden behind a polished surface. Sarah tried to engage him in conversation during lunch, asking about his thoughts on the seminar, but his answers were vague, deflective. By the time the afternoon session began, Sarah's resolve had hardened. She decided to keep her eyes open and her questions unspoken, for now. The session was about managing joint finances, a subject Sarah normally enjoyed discussing with Jack. But this time, her focus was split. She kept her gaze trained on him out of the corner of her eye, looking for any signs of discomfort or distraction. Jack appeared engaged, occasionally nodding or jotting down notes, but Sarah noticed his phone light up twice during the session. He didn't pick it up, but his hand lingered on it, as if tempted. When the session ended, Jack made a familiar excuse. "I'll catch up with you later, just need to make a quick call," and disappeared into the hallway again. Sarah didn't follow immediately. Instead, she sat for a moment, her mind racing. Maggie's words from earlier echoed in her head. "It's shocking how little you can truly know about someone, even after years together." Determined, Sarah stood and walked briskly toward the hallway. She spotted Jack at the far end, standing in a quiet corner near the resort's main offices. His back was to her, and his body language was tense. She slowed her steps, keeping a safe distance as she watched him speak animatedly into his phone. She caught snippets of his conversation. "No, she doesn't know. I told you I'd handle it. Just a few more days." Sarah's stomach twisted. The words were casual enough to sound innocent to an outsider, but to her, they carried a weight she couldn't ignore. She doesn't know. Her heart pounded as she ducked out of sight before Jack could turn around. Later that evening, during dinner at the resort's lakeside restaurant, Sarah decided to test him again. She brought up the idea of reviewing their finances, framing it as a casual thought inspired by the day's sessions. "Maybe tomorrow morning we could sit down and go over everything together," she said, keeping her tone light. Jack didn't flinch, but there was a brief flicker of something in his eyes. Annoyance? Panic? It was gone so quickly Sarah couldn't be sure. "Sure," he replied smoothly. "But I think we're in great shape, don't you? No need to stress over the details." The reply was too perfect, too rehearsed. Sarah pressed on. "I just think it's good to double-check. You know, make sure everything's where it should be." Jack gave her a charming smile, the kind that had once made her heart flutter. "Of course, whatever makes you happy." But his hand tightened around his wineglass, and Sarah knew she had struck a nerve. That night, as Jack slept soundly beside her, Sarah couldn't find peace. The envelope, the phone calls, the cryptic conversations. They painted a picture she didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. Slipping out of bed, she padded quietly to where Jack's jacket hung on the back of a chair. Her hands trembled as she searched the pockets, but they were empty. Whatever he had been carrying was no longer there. Her frustration grew, but she wasn't ready to give up. Moving to his nightstand, she opened the drawer slowly, careful not to make a sound. There, tucked beneath a folded resort map, was his phone. She hesitated, guilt warring with determination, but the need for answers outweighed her conscience. The phone was locked, of course. She tried his usual passcode, his birthday. The screen lit up. Relief and dread washed over her as she began scrolling through his messages. Most were innocuous, family group chats, friends sending jokes. But then she found an exchange with an unfamiliar number. The messages were short and cryptic. Unknown. Did you get it? Jack. Yes. Stop contacting me here. Unknown. We have a problem. Call me. Her heart raced as she read the words over and over. What had Jack gotten, and what kind of problem was he trying to solve? Before she could think further, the screen flashed a low battery warning. She quickly locked the phone and placed it back in the drawer, her mind spinning. As she climbed back into bed, careful not to wake him, one thing was clear. Jack was hiding something big, and whatever it wasn't just a minor secret. The shadow it cast over their life felt immense, suffocating. She lay awake long into the night, her thoughts a whirlwind of suspicion and fear. The next morning, Sarah awoke to the sound of Jack whistling in the bathroom. His cheerful demeanor grated against the weight in her chest, but she forced herself to match his energy. "Sleep well?" he asked as he emerged, running a towel through his hair. "Like a rock," Sarah lied, her smile practiced. As they headed down to breakfast, Sarah couldn't shake the tension building inside her. She needed answers, but confronting Jack outright felt premature. Instead, she decided to probe subtly, to find the cracks in his story and see if they led anywhere. During breakfast, she brought up the seminar again. "Maggie told me about a session today on protecting your identity online," she said casually. "Sounds like something you'd be interested in." Jack glanced up from his eggs, his expression guarded. "Maybe. What time is it?" Sarah shrugged. "Not sure. I think it's mid-morning." She watched him closely, noting how he avoided eye contact, his usual confidence replaced by a flicker of hesitation. "I might skip that one," he said, taking a sip of coffee. "I've been to enough of these over the years. They all say the same thing." Sarah nodded, letting the subject drop for now, but her resolve hardened. Jack wasn't just distracted, he was evading something, and she was determined to find out what. After breakfast, Sarah made her way to the seminar hall, but instead of attending the session, she veered off toward the resort's business center. She had a plan, though it made her stomach churn with nerves. If Jack wouldn't give her answers, she'd find them herself. The business center was quiet, a row of computers humming softly under fluorescent lights. Sarah logged onto one and hesitated for a moment before typing the words that had haunted her since she'd first seen them: Amanda Rivers. The search results populated quickly, and Sarah's eyes scanned the page, her heart pounding. Most of the results were unremarkable: social media profiles, LinkedIn pages, but one stood out: a local news article titled, "Accountant linked to fraud scandal goes missing." The name hit her like a bolt of lightning. Amanda Rivers wasn't just some random woman. She was the former business partner of Jack's old accounting firm. The article was dated 3 years earlier, detailing how Amanda had vanished amid allegations of embezzling millions from clients. Authorities had suspected she fled the country, but no leads had ever surfaced. Sarah sat frozen, her mind reeling. Jack had never mentioned Amanda's disappearance. He'd barely talked about his time at the firm, brushing off questions about his retirement as boring accounting stuff. But now, pieces of the puzzle were snapping together in her mind. The woman at the seminar, the envelope, the cryptic phone messages. By the time Sarah returned to the seminar hall, her thoughts were a storm. She slipped into her seat beside Maggie, who gave her a curious look. "Everything okay?" Maggie whispered. Sarah hesitated before nodding. "Fine, just tired, I guess." Maggie didn't press further, but as the session continued, Sarah leaned closer. "You know a lot about financial crimes, right?" she asked in a low voice. Maggie's eyebrows raised. "More than I'd like to, unfortunately." "Why?" "I read something this morning," Sarah said carefully, "about someone Jack used to work with. Amanda Rivers." Maggie's face darkened. Amanda Rivers? That name's familiar. Wasn't she the one tied to that huge fraud case? Sarah nodded, her hands gripping her notebook tightly. She disappeared a few years ago, but now, I think Jack might be connected to her somehow. Maggie leaned back, her expression serious. "Sarah, you have to be careful. If he's tied to that scandal, he might be hiding a lot more than you think." The words sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. She had already begun to suspect Jack's double life wasn't just about money or secrets. It was something darker, something dangerous. That evening, Sarah decided to confront Jack in her own way. As they sat on the balcony, sipping wine and watching the lake shimmer in the fading sunlight, she broached the subject carefully. "Do you ever think about your old firm?" she asked, her tone casual. Jack glanced at her, surprised by the question. "Not really." "Why?" "Oh, I don't know. I read something about Amanda Rivers today," Sarah said, keeping her gaze on the horizon. "It's awful what happened to her." Jack's reaction was subtle but telling. His shoulders stiffened, and he took a long sip of wine before answering. "Yeah, terrible. I don't know much about it, though. I wasn't involved in any of that." His voice was calm, but Sarah caught the slight tremor beneath the surface. "You never mentioned her before," she said, her words light but pointed. "There wasn't much to mention," Jack replied quickly. "We barely worked together." The lie hung in the air between them, palpable and heavy. Sarah didn't push further, but her resolve deepened. Jack was hiding something big, and she wasn't going to stop until she uncovered the truth. That night, as Jack slept soundly beside her, Sarah lay awake again, her mind racing. She knew now that this wasn't just a case of an unfaithful husband or a midlife crisis. Jack's secrets ran deeper than she could have imagined, and whatever he was hiding, it was dangerous enough to make him lie, deflect, and evade at every turn. Sarah's fear grew, but so did her determination. She wasn't going to let this break her, not yet. The morning was unusually still, the air heavy with a sense of foreboding that Sarah couldn't shake. Jack seemed his usual self, whistling softly as he packed his bag for the day's sessions, but Sarah's eyes lingered on him, studying every movement. She noticed the way he glanced at his phone before tucking it into his pocket, his hand lingering a moment too long. Every small action felt loaded with meaning now, a piece of a puzzle she was desperate to solve. Over breakfast, Sarah brought up the sessions for the day. "I think I'll check out the talk on financial fraud," she said casually, gauging Jack's reaction. His head tilted slightly, his fork pausing mid-air. "Fraud? That's not exactly light breakfast conversation," he joked, his tone light but his eyes sharp. "Well, with everything going on these days, it's good to be informed," she replied smoothly. "You never know who you can trust." Jack gave her a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "True," he said simply, before changing the subject to the resort's evening activities. The session on financial fraud was held in a smaller conference room, its intimate setting giving it an air of importance. Sarah sat in the back, her notepad ready, though her mind was far from the presentation's content. The speaker, a retired investigator, recounted case after case of embezzlement, hidden assets, and financial schemes that had ruined lives. As he spoke, Sarah's stomach churned. Each story felt like a shadow of Jack's hidden life, a mirror reflecting secrets she hadn't yet uncovered. One story in particular caught her attention. The investigator described a case involving a man who had used his spouse's name to open offshore accounts, funneling stolen money through her unsuspecting hands. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Was it possible she'd been unknowingly complicit in Jack's schemes? The thought left her breathless. After the session, Sarah lingered, waiting for the small crowd to disperse. She approached the speaker, her heart pounding. "Excuse me," she began, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "I found your talk fascinating." The man smiled warmly. "Glad you enjoyed it. These are important things to be aware of." Sarah hesitated before continuing. "I was wondering, how would someone go about uncovering hidden accounts? Hypothetically, of course." The speaker's expression turned serious. "Well, it depends. If you're suspicious of someone close to you, start with the basics. Discrepancies in shared accounts, unexplained withdrawals, documents they keep private. If it's more elaborate, offshore accounts, for example, you might need legal help or even a forensic accountant." His words echoed in Sarah's mind as she thanked him and walked out. She had always trusted Jack implicitly, but now she realized how little she truly knew about their financial situation. If he had been hiding things from her, where would she even begin to look? Back in their room, Sarah waited for Jack to leave for his own session. As soon as the door closed behind him, she moved quickly, her hands trembling as she searched his belongings. She started with his suitcase, carefully checking the pockets and hidden compartments. Her heart raced when her fingers brushed against a small, unfamiliar notebook. She opened it to find a series of scribbled notes, numbers, and what appeared to be names. Among them was a name she recognized: Amanda Rivers. Next to it was an address and a set of dates. Flipping through the pages, Sarah found more notes. Cryptic phrases like "transfer complete" and "discrepancy resolved." Her breath hitched when she saw her own name listed on a page, followed by a number she didn't recognize. What was Jack doing, and why was her name here? That evening, Sarah couldn't bring herself to confront Jack directly. Instead, she decided to dig deeper. With Maggie's help, she planned her next move. Over a quiet drink in the resort's lounge, Sarah confided in her new friend. "I found something," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft hum of conversation. "A notebook, with names and notes. My name's in it." Maggie's face darkened. "Sarah, you need to be careful. If he's hiding this much, he's capable of more than you realize." "I know," Sarah replied, her hands gripping her glass tightly. "But I can't stop now. I need to know the truth." Maggie nodded. "Then let's figure this out. Together." Later that night, after Jack had fallen asleep, Sarah slipped out of bed and retrieved the notebook from its hiding place. With her phone's flashlight illuminating the pages, she began cross-referencing the notes with the limited information she had. One entry stood out, a date that matched the weekend Jack had claimed to be on a fishing trip with old friends. Next to it was a location, a city miles away from their home, and another name she didn't recognize. As she pieced together the fragments, a horrifying realization began to take shape. Jack's life wasn't just a web of lies. It was a carefully constructed facade, one that had ensnared her without her even knowing. By the time she returned the notebook and climbed back into bed, Sarah's mind was made up. She would uncover the full truth, no matter how deep the rabbit hole went. Jack stirred beside her, his breathing even and calm, but Sarah lay wide awake, staring into the darkness. Whatever he was hiding, she knew now that it was bigger than she could have imagined. and she wasn't sure she was ready for what she would find. The next morning, Sarah moved with purpose. Jack had already left for an early session, giving her the time she needed to execute her plan. She retrieved the notebook from its hiding spot again and carefully photographed each page with her phone. The entries, cryptic as they were, felt like a ticking time bomb. Every number, every name was a clue she couldn't afford to lose. She glanced at her watch, her heart racing. Maggie was waiting for her in the resort's coffee shop. They had agreed to meet early, away from the prying eyes of other attendees. Sarah tucked her phone into her purse, stuffed the notebook back into Jack's belongings, and hurried out of the room. Maggie was already seated at a corner table, a steaming cup of tea in front of her. Her warm smile faded as Sarah slid into the chair opposite her, the weight of the morning's discoveries evident on her face. "What did you find?" Maggie asked, leaning in. Sarah unlocked her phone and handed it to Maggie, showing her the photos of the notebook pages. "Look at this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There are names, dates, and numbers. I think these might be account balances or transactions. And there's something else. My name is in here." Maggie's eyes narrowed as she scrolled through the images. "This isn't just shady bookkeeping. This looks like evidence of something much bigger. These could be offshore accounts, or worse." She paused, her expression grim. "Sarah, you need to be prepared for the possibility that Jack's involved in serious criminal activity." Sarah's throat tightened. She had already suspected as much, but hearing it said aloud made the reality sink in. "What should I do?" she asked, her voice trembling. Maggie leaned forward, her voice steady and calm. "First, you need to protect yourself. If your name is connected to any of this, you could be implicated, even if you had no idea. Second, you need outside help. This is too big to handle alone." Sarah nodded slowly. "I don't know where to start." "I might," Maggie said, a determined look in her eyes. "I know someone, an investigator I worked with after my husband's fraud case. He's retired now, but he might be willing to help. If you're ready to take that step, I can call him." Sarah hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Call him. I need to know what I'm dealing with." The investigator, a sharp-eyed man named Paul, agreed to meet them at a cafe in town later that afternoon. Sarah felt a wave of unease as she sat across from him, recounting what she had discovered. Paul listened intently, taking notes in a small leather-bound notebook. When she showed him the photos of Jack's notebook, his expression darkened. "This isn't amateur work," he said, flipping through the images on her phone. "These are offshore accounts. The numbers align with typical laundering operations, moving funds through multiple channels to obscure the trail." Sarah's stomach churned. "But why would my name be in there? I've never signed anything or been involved in his work." Paul's gaze was steady. "It could be for leverage, or he might have used your information without your knowledge. Either way, you're connected to this now, at least on paper." Maggie reached over and squeezed Sarah's hand. "You're not alone in this," she said firmly. Paul leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed. "There's more. That name, Amanda Rivers, it's significant. She wasn't just a missing accountant. She was the linchpin in a major fraud operation. If Jack was connected to her disappearance, he might be involved in much more than financial crimes." The words hit Sarah like a blow. She had prepared herself for lies, for betrayal. But this, it was a nightmare she hadn't seen coming. "What should I do now?" she asked, her voice shaking. Paul closed his notebook. "You need to confront him, but not yet. We need more evidence first, something that definitively ties him to these accounts and whatever happened to Amanda Rivers. If you confront him now, he could destroy evidence or worse, disappear entirely." Sarah nodded, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. I'll do whatever it takes. Paul's expression softened. Good, but be careful. If Jack senses that you're onto him, there's no telling what he might do. That evening Sarah returned to the resort, her thoughts a whirlwind. Jack greeted her with his usual charm, but she could barely look at him without seeing the shadow of the man Paul had described. As they sat down for dinner, Jack poured them each a glass of wine, oblivious to the storm brewing inside her. "You seem quiet," he said, his tone casual. "Everything okay?" Sarah forced a smile. "Just tired. The sessions have been a lot to process." Jack nodded, swirling his wine. "Yeah, they really throw a lot at you, but it's good to be prepared." The irony of his words was almost too much to bear. Sarah excused herself early, retreating to their room under the pretense of a headache. She needed time to think, to plan her next move. Jack stayed behind, mingling with other attendees, his laughter carrying through the open door of the dining hall. As Sarah sat alone in their room, the gravity of her situation settled over her. Jack's secrets weren't just his. They had seeped into her life, threatening to pull her under, but she wasn't going to let that happen. Not without a fight. She stared out the window at the darkened lake, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. Somewhere out there, the truth was waiting, and Sarah was ready to find it, no matter the cost. The morning broke with a sharp chill in the air, the lake's surface obscured by a thick layer of fog. Sarah woke early, her heart heavy with determination. Today she would confront Jack, but not without a plan. The weight of what she had discovered lingered in her chest, an unbearable pressure that made her feel both fragile and resolute. Jack stirred beside her, his usual easy demeanor starkly contrasting the storm brewing inside her. "Morning," he said, stretching. "Sleep okay?" Sarah managed a faint smile. "Better than yesterday," she replied, her voice calm despite the turmoil. She watched as Jack dressed and prepared for the day. Every movement, every word felt calculated now, as though she were watching a stranger. "I'm heading to the last session before lunch," Jack said, grabbing his bag. "You coming?" "I'll catch up with you later," Sarah replied. "I want to go over some notes from yesterday." Jack nodded, leaned in to kiss her cheek, and left the room. The moment the door clicked shut, Sarah sprang into action. She retrieved the notebook she had hidden beneath a stack of towels in the bathroom and quickly photographed the remaining pages she hadn't gotten to before. She was ready now, armed with evidence, questions, and the resolve to face whatever truth lay ahead. After lunch, Sarah spotted Jack sitting alone on the resort's terrace, his phone in one hand and a glass of water in the other. He seemed relaxed, his guard down. It was the perfect moment. "Jack," Sarah began as she approached, her tone even and steady. She sat across from him, placing her hands on the table. "We need to talk." Jack looked up, startled by her serious tone. "Sure," he said, setting his phone down. "What's on your mind?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I've been noticing things, strange things, the phone calls, the envelopes, the lies." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "And then there's this." She pulled her phone from her pocket and turned the screen toward him, displaying the photos of his notebook. Jack's expression shifted, a flicker of panic flashing across his face before he masked it with a calm facade. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice measured. "That's not the question you should be asking," Sarah shot back. "What I want to know is why my name is in here, why Amanda Rivers is in here. What have you been hiding from me, Jack?" Jack's jaw tightened, and for a moment he said nothing. Then he leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning the terrace to ensure no one was within earshot. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "It's not what you think." "Then explain it to me," Sarah demanded, her voice trembling with anger and hurt. "Because right now, It looks like you've been lying to me for years. It looks like you're involved in something illegal, maybe even dangerous. So start talking." Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's complicated," he began, his voice low. "Amanda, she was reckless. She got involved in things she shouldn't have, and when it all fell apart, I was dragged into the mess. I had no choice." Sarah stared at him, her heart pounding. "Dragged into what, Jack? Embezzlement? Fraud? Are you saying you're innocent in all this?" Jack hesitated, his silence louder than any confession. "I did what I had to do," he said finally. "To protect us, to protect you." Sarah felt a surge of anger rise within her. "Protect me? By forging my name on documents? By putting me at risk without my knowledge? Do you even hear yourself?" Jack reached across the table, his voice pleading. "Sarah, you have to believe me. I never wanted this to happen. Amanda threatened to expose me if I didn't cooperate. She was the one who—" "She disappeared," Sarah interrupted, her voice sharp. "Is that what you're going to say? That she vanished and left you holding the bag? Or is there more, Jack? Did you have something to do with her disappearance?" Jack's face paled, and for the first time Sarah saw fear in his eyes. He shook his head, but the denial felt hollow. I didn't hurt her," he said, his voice barely audible. "She was unstable. She said she was going to run, and I helped her. I thought if I got her out of the country, she'd leave me alone." Sarah's blood ran cold. "You helped her? With what money, Jack? Our money? The money you've been hiding in these accounts?" Jack didn't answer. The silence between them was deafening, the weight of his lies crushing the air around them. Sarah stood, her hands trembling. "I trusted you," she said, her voice breaking. "I gave you everything, and you've been living a life I didn't even know existed." "Sarah, please," Jack said, standing and reaching for her, but she stepped back, her resolve firm. "I'm done being in the dark," she said. "I'm going to the authorities. If you won't come clean, they'll make sure you do." Jack's face twisted in desperation. "You don't know what you're doing. If you go to them, they'll drag you into this too." Sarah met his gaze, her voice steady. "Maybe, but I'd rather face the truth than live another day in your lies." With that, she turned and walked away, her heart pounding with fear and determination. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. Jack's secrets were no longer hers to keep. In the end, the truth shattered her world but also set her free. What began as a routine seminar turned into a revelation of betrayal and deceit, proving that even the closest bonds can hide dark secrets. Her courage to uncover the truth reminds us of the strength it takes to face what's hidden. If you found this story as gripping as we did, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more shocking true crime stories that will leave you questioning everything.